Imagine that it's not a virtual meeting. You can see down below the captions just started. So we're recording this session. We have a few colleagues who let me know that they aren't able to attend. And then for those of you who would like to reference it again, this will be recorded and posted, and it will be transcribed. And then in your, when you name yourself, we are going to rename ourselves in just a bit. So in the next slide actually is what we're going to do. We have a big group today. And we'd like for you, just like we would do if we were in person, to have time with your district teams. So what we'd like to do is have you rename yourselves with the 2-digit number that precedes your district on this list that you see on the slide. You'll put that 2-digit number, and you can see my example is wrong, so don't do what I do. It should say, if I was in Alvord, I would do 01, Naomi de Macaulay, Alvord. So please rename yourself. If you don't know where to find that, if you go to your image on the screen, you'll see on the top right-hand corner 3 little lines or 3 little dots. If you click on that, you will see a drop-down menu where it says rename. And so we'll click on rename, and then it will give you an option to enter a new screen name. So go ahead and do that. And this facilitates us putting you into breakout rooms when it's time to have team discussions about a particular topic. For those who are guest LEAs who are not part of Riverside County, we do have a room for you at number 26. If you are a district in Riverside County and you happen not to have other team members with you, you are welcome to join the guest LEA or just let us know if there's a particular group that you would like to join. All right, awesome. Thank you, everybody. Lost my chat here. Charters, what we're going to do, that's a great question, Camille. Do charters put the number of the district they reside? 24, we had grouped the charters by grade level. So we put the K-8 and K-12 charters in a room, and then 25 would be the 9-12 charters. We thought if you would like to work with your district team, that's fine. If you'd like to work with other charters, then you would put the number of the charter group. Your choice. And we have a copy of this slide in the workshop, in the shared workshops folder as well, in case you don't remember what room you're in, and we'll periodically remind you guys. So, all right, I think everyone's had a chance to do that, Brian. We can go on to the next slide. So we are in November of 2020, and every month so far in 2020 has been like, but wait, there's more. I'm probably aging myself putting, I think his name is Billy Blanks on the screen. But it has been a challenge, and in spite of the challenge, you all have risen to the occasion. And now we've got the challenge of developing a 3-year LCAP. Thank you, Billy Mays. Thank you, Adrian. I knew it was Billy something. And now we've got the challenge of developing a 3-year LCAP. And so that's not going to stop us, though, because we are equity warriors and want to continue doing what's best for kids. And so let's go to the next slide. And I'd like to just have us ground ourselves in LCAP development. And let's talk about the challenges and opportunities in LCAP development. So there are 2 prompts on the screen. One is, what challenges to LCAP development do you anticipate this year? And the other is, in spite of the challenges that have presented themselves as a result of the global pandemic, what opportunities are available to do what's best for your students? And so what we're going to do is, everyone can click on this link to the Jamboard. Actually, let me put the link in the chat for you. Oops, copy link. Okay, and you'll go in the Jamboard and enter your responses. And so if you don't know how to use Jamboard, I have a little tutorial right here on the screen. You can, when you open it up, you'll see this bar, this bar where it says sticky note pointing to it. You can make a sticky note just clicking on that, and this little image that says sticky note and all these colored dots will show up, and you can pick a color sticky note that you want to answer the question. On the top of the screen, actually, I'm going to click on it so that I can, Brian, would you click on that, please, so that we can actually show everybody what that looks like, what the Jamboard looks like. So there's the Jamboard. There's the bar I was talking about. The sticky note is the fourth graphic down. So you click on it, that box to generate a sticky note pops up. All you need to do is start typing. If you want to change the color, just pick a different color. And then you can move that sticky note around the screen and make it a different size if you want. At the very top, it says 1 out of 2. If you click on the right arrow, it will take you to the next question. So the first page talks about challenges. The second page talks about opportunity. I'll give us a few minutes to talk about that, or actually post our sticky notes, and I'll mute myself for a little bit. Sorry, guys, I didn't realize there was a maximum user use for Jamboard. But for those who got on, thank you very much for your stickies. Brian, do you mind clicking on page 2 so people can see that prompt as well? Okay. Awesome. And this link will still be live. So even as you're talking with your teams today, and you think of something, you are more than welcome to go back to the Jamboard and add your thoughts for challenges and opportunities. We will gather these and collect them and then share them with everybody so that the ideas can be shared across our county. We'll do 1 more minute for Jamboard before we move on.
Just say once people are able to get their thoughts down, if they leave the Jamboard, some of those other folks that couldn't get in could get in and post theirs.
Oh, true. I'd read them to you, but the screen is very tiny and I have old eyes, so I'll have to just type them up for you and send them. All right, Brian, we can move on. We had that 1 minute. Thank you for those who are adding to it. And for those who didn't have an opportunity, please go back when you have a chance to, if you have some thoughts that you'd like to share. So now we'll jump in and I'll give you an idea of what we're talking about today in our 3 hours together. We will have some breaks in between. So we'll hear from Jeff, legislative updates. We'll look at what's new in the LCAP template, just sort of a brief overview of what's new in that. Brian and Steve will talk about metrics, and Steve will demonstrate the Tableau target setting tool that he developed. We'll share ideas on the through line concept and forethought process for actions, any fiscal considerations, whether through legislative updates and a discussion of the budget overview from parents. Our own James Whittington will share that. Our colleagues from West Ed, Tia, Sarah, and Anthony are joining us later to do a redefining the base with all the between the end of last year and now. We thought that perhaps a consideration of redefining your base might help in your LCAP planning this year. And then we'll share some resources and do an evaluation at the end of this. So I pass the speaking opportunity to our colleague, Jeff.
Thank you, Naomi. Good morning, everyone. I've been amusing myself by watching the closed captioning and seeing where it's not exactly the words that are coming out of the speaker's mouth. So that's fun if you want to try that. I also have to admit, I shouldn't admit this to such a large group, that from 1971 to 1978, I actually kept a running list of every #1 song on Casey Kasem's American Top 40. So I didn't even have to look up my song. I knew it from memory. I can remember all of that. Just don't ask me what I did yesterday. So what I wanted to do today, I wanted to kind of frame the politics around the LCAP in 2021. Rather than look back, look forward. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the composition of the state legislature after Tuesday night's election. I'm going to talk a little bit about the status of California's economy and the prospects for the state budget that will come out in January. And then talk about the likely legislative focus in 2021, because all of this is going to have ramifications on the LCAP, I believe, next year. And these are things that we think up here in Sacramento that you should at least keep in mind as you begin this process in the weeks and months to come. So on the next slide, not a lot of change for the 21-22 legislature. We are definitely the bluest of blue states. So what we call super majorities in both houses. And in the state Senate, that could even end up being 32-8 once all the votes are counted. Because amazingly enough, we do continue to count votes after election night. So there won't be a lot of changes, I think, in the way that the legislature approaches accountability in K-12 public education. What we've seen this fall in some of the oversight hearings that they've held on COVID-19 related issues is that there are quite a few legislators that have their own children are in elementary school or high school, and they've been reacting to their own experiences with distance learning, which can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing, because the one thing that we deal with quite a bit up here is making policy by anecdote, which can be a dangerous thing. So Brian, on the next slide, I'm going to give you a little primer on Proposition 98 and really focus on the far left of that graphic. We are in what is called Test 1 of Proposition 98. So Prop 98 funding is directly tied to state revenues that are coming in. So for each dollar of revenue, 40% of that is dedicated to K-14 education. So why is that important? On the next slide, what you see is the way that state revenues have been coming in. And the good news is that tax collections are above the projections that were included in the in the June Budget Act that was signed by Governor Newsom in the last week of June. Now, that's good news, but it also, don't pop the champagne yet, because on the next slide, what you see from the Legislative Analyst's Office is the situation that we're going into as we get closer to the January budget. We had a $10 billion hole in Prop 98 as we enter 21-22. That's why all of your districts are dealing with deferrals. So unless the Prop 98 guarantee increases by more than $10 billion, we're going to be in a situation where some very difficult decisions need to be made by the legislature. If it does go over 10 billion, then we can probably avoid program cuts or new deferrals. There might even be some one-time funding or maybe even ongoing funding for augmentations. I wouldn't take that to the bank yet. And we might even be able to eliminate some of the deferrals that are scheduled for the Prop 98 apportionments next year. But I don't think that's going to happen. Most observers believe that it will be less than 10 billion. So then the choice becomes, and there really are no good choices, additional deferrals, cutting funding for K-14 programs, or spending above the minimum guarantee, which the legislature might like to do, but it's likely that the Department of Finance would resist that because they're not dealing only with the Prop 98 side of the budget, but with all of the other state programs that are outside of Proposition 98. So there's no question that it's going to be a challenging year. On the next slide, you see what we think are going to be the key issues of concern to the legislature. The inconsistency across the state in distance learning, the inconsistency, and as some are arguing, inequity in school reopening simply because each county is in a different tier, and some counties have been more successful than others in securing, for example, a elementary school waiver, and also inequities between private schools, which in many instances have the resources to open and provide for a safe, socially distanced environment when public schools may not. Closing the digital divide, there have been a number of hearings this fall on that topic. There have been a number of hearings and conversations about the impact that the closures in schools not being open are having on student mental health. And then we're hearing a lot, not just from members of the legislature, but also earlier this week, in fact, at a meeting with the Department of Finance, about the inconsistency of engagement with families and stakeholders. So what we've been trying to do in our work, our advocacy work, is basically provide them with examples of where successes are taking place on a local basis, and also let them know that in many instances, the challenges that you are all facing and the teams that you work with in your districts are making it really difficult to do all of these things. And the fact that there is not likely to be a lot of available funding because all of these things are very expensive is not going to stop the legislature from talking about them. So we just want to underscore what we believe will be probably an unprecedented focus on the work that you do in your LCAPs this year. And we will, in all likelihood, want to maintain close communication with a number of you to provide feedback to members and staff of the legislature, perhaps to meet with them and talk about the issues that you're dealing with. We've heard discussions, I know, from some of you and other LEAs across the state. Why don't we just proceed with another learning kind of, oh God, I can't remember what the LearnCap, what we called the LearnCap. Why can't we just do that in the next year? We don't think they're going to be wanting to even have that conversation. So it's kind of a difficult hand that everybody's been dealt. Thank you, Learning Continuity Attendance Plan. I can't even keep my acronyms straight anymore. So, a challenging year. We want to be able to, help you, but I think everyone should be prepared not for decision makers congratulating and praising everyone for the great work that we know is happening, but probably a focus on what they see as being gaps. It's an unfortunate situation, but as I said, it's the hand we've been dealt, and we would just encourage everyone. And it's easy for me to say, I know, but this year is probably more important than any other in the past to do everything possible and document everything possible with respect to engagement and how that takes place. I think that is my last slide. And we will, as always, be providing updates I know many of you are in different work-alike groups that I or my colleague Leticia present to across the state. So we will keep you apprised, and we hope that you will keep us apprised of what's happening in your districts. So that is, I believe this is where I hand it over to my colleague, James Whittington. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of the workshop this morning.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I'll carry on that happy tone you set with the financial side at the local level. So looking at first interim, because a lot of the things Jeff mentioned and the challenges at the state level, our advice to districts going into the first interim financial report was to consider multiple scenarios. What does your budget look like with a zero COLA going forward? What does it look like with some reductions? What does it look like with maybe some larger reductions? Where are you going to go in terms of budget solvency to stay solvent in the out years? Because we're in a time right now where districts are a little bit flush with cash for a specific purpose, learning loss mitigation funds, some of the COVID relief dollars, but very narrowly focused. And so, like Jeff mentioned, there might be some opportunities in the near future for additional one-time or ongoing money, but the concern, I guess, or the caution we're advising is that that money might also be very narrowly focused and not for general operations of the school district. So you might be forced to cut somewhere so that you can and then build somewhere else where the state mandates it based on the funding they're giving out. And then, of course, our employee costs are projected to continue on their upward trajectory. PERS and STIRS are not stopping anytime soon. We got a little bit of relief in the state budget last year. I don't anticipate the state being flush with a couple extra billion this year to give any more relief on the retirement contributions for PERS or STIRS. And then health and welfare costs. I think health and welfare costs are becoming more difficult to project in terms of where the crisis is, the health crisis is at this point. So I think rates might flatten out for a little bit, but then we might see them climb again. And then, of course, the great unknown in all of your districts is what does enrollment look like in these out years? I mean, we are all, I think, experiencing declines in enrollment in the current year, but the question is, will those enrollment declines stabilize? Will those kids come back? Is it just a one-year flux, or are these permanent losses and permanent changes in the enrollment of your district, and then the significant impact that has on your budget in those out years? So right now, districts have an extra year of enrollment decline protection, ADA protection, but any declines in the current year or next year that persist will start negatively affecting your revenue rather quickly, especially if those declines are compounded from 2 or 3 years of pent-up decline. So again, just we're advising caution in terms of fiscal projections, coming up with multiple scenarios, looking at ways to save where you can and maintain solvency and be effective in your dollars that you're spending, which of course is going to dovetail into the base discussion later on today. And so that's all I'll add at this point for fiscal considerations from in terms of the big picture. I'll turn it back over to the LCAP team.
Thanks, Jeff and James. Any questions for our esteemed colleagues here? As always, if you think of any, you can unmute yourselves or post them in the chat. All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead and move on with Alicia, who's going to tell you about the new updates template. Okay, maybe I'm doing the updates. Sorry about that. All right, what's new in the LCAP template? So when we go to the next slide, have you guys had some of these thoughts? And those thoughts are, I've already analyzed my 2019 dashboard data. I engaged stakeholders in LCAP development last spring and winter and spring, and our needs haven't changed much since we completed our LCAP draft, so it should be good enough as it is. Well, those thoughts may have already happened, and I know that some people had these thoughts. They shared them with me, not these exact thoughts, but something related to them when we were toward the end of last year and going into what the legislature mandated SE operations written report and the learning continuity attendance plan. But alas, we do have a 3-year LCAP, so we did get to skip this year, 2019-20, and we will start, 2021. It will start with next year's LCAP, and it will start with 2021 and go through 2024. So that said, we did take a look at some of the last year. We did take a look template last year when it first came out and was approved by the state board in January of 2019. And that template, according to CDE, shouldn't change if there are any minor changes. I heard through the grapevine it might be some dates, meaning the years in terms of, because the LCAP might say 2020 to 23, and it could just be changing to 2021 to 24. So it would be minor, but the actual structure of the template would stay the same. And so when we look at that template, just because I know some of you, all of you actually, your last LCAP was on the old template, and that's pictured on your left here. And so the new template is now on landscape format, and it's got a few changes that we'll go into. So one of the first changes is the plan summary. And so on the next slide, you can see some of the details on the plan summary. In 2019-20, in the old LCAP was 2017 to 20. It had these 4 items along with particulars under review of performance. It has now been streamlined to these 5 bullets for the 21 to 24 LCAP. So you can see general information, and it's encompassing the story. The highlights are in the reflections where you're talking about successes. And when we're talking, as well as the greatest needs, when we're talking about identified need, that was part of the review of performance as well. And you can see that CSI prompts are still part of the LCAP, the coming LCAP, not this year as they are standalone prompts. The next slide shows what the plan summary looked like. And the template is in the resources folder. So if you'd like to take a look at that, the page is there, a reference where you can find the plan summary. It's really the first page of the template. The instructions follow the template, so those start on page 9. And you can see that in the old template how each of the new sections coincides with what was in the old template on this slide.
Naomi, I'm here. I'm sorry. I thought, James was going to talk a little bit longer, but he wrapped it up quick there. Do you want me to continue for you, Naomi, and jump in?
Sure, if you'd like.
Okay. And then while I'm doing that, guys, there's a lot of you who have not renumbered yourselves. So if you could please, there's a copy of that slide in the folder. Go ahead and renumber yourself, because we want to make sure we get you in a good breakout group after this discussion. So like Naomi said, the plan summary has changed a little bit. So the story has changed to general information. Go ahead, Brian, you can click. And you can see that what we used to, under review of performance, have greatest progress is now reflections, success. And then the greatest needs has been condensed into one section, which is identified need. And then the last part, the LCAP highlights, they've put that at the bottom. So I think there's 2 more clicks there, Brian. All right. So one of the other new things in the LCAP this year is that there's 3 different types of goals, options. And remember, these are options. This isn't saying that you have to have one of each of these, but these are just options that they wanted to present for you guys to be able to write this year. So the first one is a focus goal. Go ahead, Brian, a couple more clicks. There's also a broad goal, and then a maintenance of progress goal. And I'm going to go into a little more detail on each of these types of goals right now. So next slide. So a focus goal is exactly what it says. It's concentrated in scope, and it has probably fewer metrics, and it's time bound, and you're going to say how it's measured. So a couple of examples. Go ahead. One more. There we go. So instead of saying, students will be educated in an environment with foster school connectedness, it's going to be very focused, as you can see in that second goal. It breaks out who we're looking at, what we're looking at, the percentage that we want to get, and a timeline. So you can create these focus goals if you have something in your district that the stakeholders really want to focus on, or that you see in your data shows you that you really need to focus on. You're welcome to create a focus goal. When you are filling out the template, there is not a space for you to mark if it's a focus goal, a broad goal, or a maintenance goal. So it's just one of those things that if you want to do it, it's an option for you. All right, next one. The next one is a broad goal, and these are less concentrated with a wider range of metrics. And this is actually what we see most of in the LCAP currently. Just by spring 2021, students will demonstrate growth in academic areas as measured by federal, state, and district assessments. And then underneath that, you would put your metrics. What are you measuring? What do you want to see? What's the growth that you want to see happen? And then the maintenance of progress goal is for any of those goals that you're continuing, you're doing well and you're continuing, or any goals that might not fit, or any actions that might not fit underneath another goal, and you want to put it here in this section. So those are the 3 types of goals. And the next slide is about English Learner Program and foster youth. So this is new to the LCAP this go around. And you can see in that first paragraph for English learner programs, it tells you that you must, and must is underlined there, put in specific actions related to the language acquisition program as defined in section 306 and provided to students, and professional development activities specific for English learners. It does say that you want to put these actions in if you have a numerically significant English learner population. And what that means is 30 or more students. So if you have 30 or more English learner kiddos, you're going to have an English learner action or in there for them. And then the next one is for foster youth. And this, as you can see, is just encouraged. This isn't a must or a shall. They encourage you to put in actions specific for your foster youth students. All right. And then the draft of the annual update. Okay, so the annual update was going to be for the 1920, a separate document, but it was going to be for the 1920, so you can go back and review how you did on your actions, what's going well, what are we going to change. And obviously since then we've included the LCP. So SB 820 came out and said that all LEAs, like Jeff was talking about earlier, have to complete the annual update for 1920 and for the 2021 LCP. They are working on revising the template. You can give feedback. The window's open till the end of the day today. And if there's any feedback, we're going to try and collect some of that at the end of the session today, just to see if you guys have seen the templates, if you have any feedback that you'd like us to give, if we want to send in a document altogether. So we will be asking for that at the end. And we will be going more into that once the template is closer to being approved and we know what it's going to look like for sure. Next slide. Increase or improve services. This is always my favorite. So we talked about this if you guys were at the last couple sessions, and if not, we're going to be talking about it quite a bit. But in the first prompt here, what you're going to be doing is providing justification for wide services. So LEA wide, school wide, charter wide, anything that you're giving to everybody, but that is going to be increasing or improving services for your unduplicated pupil groups. And then the second one is describing those increase or improving services for your unduplicated pupil groups. Next slide. So in that first and second, you want to describe your actions as principally directed and effective. And they've added this language this year. And you've seen this now if you filled out an LCP, because what you have to do is put in the actions when you're describing the actions. How did you consider the needs, conditions, and circumstances of those unduplicated pupils first? And then the action, put the action in. What is it going to look like? And then how is the action going to achieve those measurable outcomes for those students, for your unduplicated student population? So we did talk about this in the last session. We gave some examples, and like I said, we're going to go into it more because we know this is a difficult part of the new template. So next slide. Another thing that they're very specific on in this new template is conclusory statements. So just saying that this action is principally directed in meeting the needs of unduplicated students isn't going to work. You need to be very specific and meet those 3 criteria when you're describing your actions in the increased improved services section. Next slide. And then one of the other things in the new instructions is any action that you're going to carry over from your previous LCAP, from your 21-24 LCAP, that is going to be put into your new LCAP, and that is a district-wide, county-wide, charter-wide action. You have to have a justification for it. So you have to be able to say, we're continuing this because it's effective. It's not, we're going to continue this, it hasn't been effective, but we're going to make this change. If it hasn't been effective at all, then, no, you're going to take it out, right? You're not going to keep doing that because it's not helping our students. So just something to think about as you're transferring actions from the previous LCAP into your new LCAP. What was effective, especially since education has changed so much since our previous LCAP, right? So just start thinking about what actions you're not going to carry forward and why, and what actions you are going to carry forward and why. And then I think the next one is reflection. Does anybody have any questions for the whole group for that section? Let me know if you guys see any questions in there.
And Alicia, before we go into team time, I wanted to say I'm sorry that I failed to tell everybody, but in the resources folder, if you go to the shared folder, you'll see a couple folders. The one for today would be labeled workshop number 1 resources, and it has the date November 6, 2020. In that folder are district folders, and so it should match the number that you have renamed yourself to. And so in that folder for each of the districts, there is a note-taking guide. So all of you should have access to that guide, and anybody on the team can take notes on it for each of the sections. And so as you are in breakout groups for this workshop, you are welcome to go in there and type what you need to type for your notes if you feel that that's something your team wants. And that folder is for you to upload any resources that you would like there as well. So sorry about that, Alicia, I just forgot to mention that. Awesome, thank you.
So good morning, everyone. I'm going to run through a few things around metrics, and this is probably a third or fourth time you'll hear this today, there is a lot more to come. So, as we were putting today's presentations together, we wanted to just reorientate everyone to where we are presently. But we know when we meet again in January and throughout the next couple of workshops, we'll need to dive a lot deeper into all of these topics. And we'll know more in January where we stand on some of these things. So specifically around metrics, the big thing I think we're all going to struggle with a little bit is there was a waiver from the U.S. Department of Ed, and then Senate Bill 98 actually put into legislation then that CDE will not publish the dashboard here in December. So there will not be a 2020 dashboard. However, there will be quite a bit of data that is still published. So there will be, so what the dashboard will look like, there'll still be the kind of the demographic data reported, and there's going to be links to DataQuest primarily that will publish a lot of the underlying data that is still collected. So for example, like graduation data, everyone has been reporting their graduation data to CalPADS. That is going to be published. You will be able to see your official graduation rate that is published, but there will not be a dashboard calculation with a color assigned. And so we're going to talk about several of those metrics here in a moment. So the other thing that this will impact is because there's no dashboard, they are not going to make any of the accountability designations this school year. So for districts, that is differentiated assistance DA. So basically everything is going to carry over. If your district was identified for differentiated assistance this last school year, that designation is going to carry over. If you are not currently designated, you will not be so designated this year. The same thing is applying through a federal waiver at the school level for CSI and ATSI designations. So all of those designations carry over. Schools that were identified for CSI last year will carry over for this current school year, and so on. So, so just kind of status quo there. So that gives you a little clarity about which schools in your LEA you may need to provide that additional support for CSI or ATSI. Now, what is this going to mean in the future? So looking ahead now to the 2021 dashboard, what CDE has announced, they're anticipating once we have new data for 2021, they're going to actually compare that back to the 2019 data that we had. So for example, for the academic indicator, most students did not take the 2020 CASP assessments. So when they take the assessments here in 2021, their data from 2021 will look back to be compared to the data in 2019 and calculate the change and the resulting color that's associated with that. We are not hearing that there's any plan to change cut points or the dashboard tables. So, we expect it to be a pretty straightforward change calculation. Remember, there are a couple of changes that were originally supposed to take place for the 2020 dashboard that will now be implemented for 2021. So one is when it comes to special education students, primarily the district of residence rule will be applied to all state indicators. So that means if you have students that are being served outside of your LEA, so that often happens if you have RCOE special education programs serving some of your special education students. Basically, their data is going to be assigned back to your LEA. That happened in the 2019 dashboard for your academic indicator. It will now happen for all indicators. So, for example, attendance data, their data will report back to your LEA. The other big change that will happen is the official implementation of the much more stringent 95% rule for the academic indicator. That's going to be especially important this year if you are still administering the CAS assessments under distance learning. It's going to be real important to get all the kids assessed. So remember that through your LCAP, you need to address all state LCFF priorities. There's 8 priorities for LEAs. There's 2 additional ones for county office programs. So in the state indicator column, we're not going to get those official dashboard indicators. However, I want to talk a moment about local indicators. So right now would be the reporting timeline for the 2020 dashboard. But remember, what you would be reporting right now would have been the indicators that indicate how you were addressing those priorities last school year. So what should be happening now and over the next couple of months is you should be going through and determining your responses for the 2020-2021 school year on the local indicators. So the self-reflection tools haven't changed. You would still use those same rubrics for the local indicators. And you should be doing that now. It is a requirement that you use those current results as you develop this year's LCAP, and you will need to take those to your board in the spring and have that public meeting where you're talking about the local indicator responses this spring. Those will then be input at some point, probably a year from now, to display on the 2021 dashboard. That local indicator quick reference guide, which is the where you get those rubrics, they are posted in the shared folder as well. Couple of requirements out of the instructions for LCAP although the dashboard indicators are not the only source of data, and that's a good thing because we won't have a dashboard this year, but you do need to reflect them in the LCAP. So you may be putting in some of your 2019 dashboard indicators, but you would probably supplement that with additional reports. Notice that it does say to use the most recent data associated with that metric. So again, I'll use the example of graduation rate, where you might want to put down your 2019 dashboard indicator, but you probably want to actually go off your 2021 when you're setting your baseline. You should be trying to report your data consistent with the dashboard. So if you don't have a dashboard color, you should be reporting your data consistently. The next couple of slides talks about what are the required metrics by statute. And there's going to be several of these. And now these have been in law since before there was a dashboard. So these required metrics haven't really changed since the implementation of LCAPs. So although the dashboard makes it much easier for many of these indicators, we can still get a pretty good representation of these. So everything on this page for priorities 1, 2, and 7, all of these are really determined through your local indicators. So as you go through the process this year to update your responses for the local indicators, you should be able to address these 5 required metrics that are on this screen. The next one, the pupil outcomes, is going to be tricky this year, no doubt about it. So notice you are required to report state assessments. The most recent data for you have for state assessments is 2019 data. You do not have any 2020 data. So that by default is going to look back to the 2019 data. But several of these other ones, you might be able to report some more recent data. For example, EL reclassification rate, you will know that more recently. Percent of pupils that pass AP exams, you should know that from your 2020, and so on. So when possible, you want to update these with your most recent data, and you should have access to this through CalPads or through the DataQuest reports. The ones under pupil engagement, these are ones that I think you're going to have to put some thought into. So for example, chronic absenteeism rates. You certainly have your 2019 rates from the last dashboard. You will be able to calculate your 2020 chronic absenteeism rate. You have your local attendance data. You have you were taking attendance up until February. So you certainly can calculate a 1920 chronic absenteeism rate, but put some thought into what's going to be the best baseline for you to for your data. You might decide that 1920 data doesn't give you a full picture. So you might want to actually use your 2019 data as your baseline. The same thing for things like suspension rates. You certainly have suspension data for last year, but is it really representative of what's really happening in your LEA? You might actually want to use the 2019 data because that's the last full school year. So let me wrap up quickly the last couple of slides here. So just a reminder how this is going to look on this new template. You identify the metric and you're going to identify the baseline. And then you're going to fill in the desired outcome, where you want to be in 3 years. Now, Naomi mentioned a few minutes ago, the dates at the top might change when they revise the LCAP, because obviously this kind of shifted forward in time for a year. But you're leaving these middle 3 blank. You're going to fill those in when you do your annual update in subsequent years. So how this might look in an example is to, in this example, you have an ELA metric, scaled score points. So you've identified what the baseline is from the 2018-19 Smarter Balanced assessments. You're leaving these blank, and then you have your desired outcomes. So Steve's going to talk about here in a moment how you might go about setting these desired outcomes and put like a real number over here. But the one thing we want to remind you on is this concept of the through line. So as you're setting your goals and you've talked about your greatest needs and your challenges, hopefully you're setting up appropriate metrics to measure how you're going to progress on your goals and actions and services. So always have that through line in mind. With that, let me turn it over to Steve to talk about the next couple of tools that we have available for you.
All right, thanks, Brian. I'm going to just very briefly go over these Riverside County outcomes, just for the sake of time. I'm going to kind of skim through them, let you know what's available in these next few slides, and it's county level information. So it just gives you an idea of where we are as a county and with the different indicators by student groups and ethnicity and program participation. So next slide, thank you. So when we're looking at our data, the way I set it up here, we were looking at 3-year trends. And what we wanted to see is how are we performing over 3 years and by program and by ethnicity and race. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the program participation. On the right-hand side, you see ethnicity. You see it's the same scale. So this allows you to compare program participants to themselves and then ethnicity and race to themselves as well. But at the same time, you can actually see across, you can see what the disparities may be between race, ethnicities, and program participation. So this is for CAS BLA. Next slide. We do have the information as well for mathematics. The following one, I believe, is for CAST and GSS. Next slide. This one, we only have 1 year's worth of data because, again, it's new. So this one's the one that looks differently, a little bit differently. The rest look the same. And but again, I want you guys to be able to just go back to this because you guys have access to the presentation and be able to do a little bit more analysis because I do want to have a little bit more time for the tool. This is something that you guys can go look at at a break or at a later time to do some analysis of how we're performing as a county. Next slide. We have the chronic absenteeism rate. We know that might be a little different with the partial kind of year that we had and then this coming year. So next one, I believe is suspension rate. This is the same for the county. We see for the county, look how foster youth is like really high, kind of off the charts. So that's something to look at as a county. It may vary by district, of course, and school site, but you know that really pops out. Next slide, I believe, is adjusted cohort graduation rate. And we can see how we're doing. Again, we see fosters are really underperforming, even though there has been a pretty good improvement over the last few years. That's a trajectory that I want to maintain so we can keep graduating our foster youth. I think the last slide is A through G rates, if I'm correct. Next slide. There we go. And that is our A through G completion rate. You know, and again, actually, we see even foster youth is performing a little bit better than students with disabilities there. But again, this is good information to kind of see us where we're trending as a county, as a whole. And again, it will be different for all your districts and your school sites, but it's good to get an idea and start some conversations. Where are you comparing to the county? Oh, and then you can always look at DataQuest or the dashboard to see how you're comparing other districts, to see if maybe you can partner with districts next door to see if there's something that they're doing that maybe you could learn from. So the next slide, I'm going to quickly intro this so that we can get to the next part of it. But as we're developing our targets for LCAPs and SIPSAs, we're generally looking to set targets that will improve student outcomes and the performance level colors. If we're eligible for DA, CSI, or ATSI, then we need to set targets that will help us get out of that status. So this tool will tell us by how much we need to improve to reach a particular color in a selected number of years. So what it does is it displays both the change required in status, so percentage rate or distance from standard, and the number of students. So this matters because if, let's say, you're looking at that needing a 5 percentage point increase to meet that next performance level color, that may seem like a lot, but if you have a smaller student population, that may only be, let's say, 3 students if you have 60 kids. So really that helps us understand that the problem is only 3 students that we need to improve. And that really allows us to allocate a proportionate amount of resources and money or staff time to address those needs. And it doesn't mean that we need millions of dollars. It may mean you only need a few $1,000s, or reallocate some resources within the district with some staff to monitor those 3 students to get them there. So this is why this tool is important. And you can go to the next slide, Brian. There's a video, so I pre-recorded the demo so we wouldn't have any technical issues, but I will be on the chat. Ask me any questions while the video is playing, and I can answer them as the video is going. Okay. Let's say that your district's English learner graduation rate is orange, and you would like to move that up to green in 3 years. I'm going to show you how you would go about doing that. You would start by selecting the entity over here, which is your district. You can also select schools. You'd go ahead and select that district that you belong to. You're going to select it there. You're going to click on grad rate for your indicator. And you're going to apply the filter. And that's going to switch out the different district, the indicator. And what it does is it's going to populate all the information for your student groups right here below your selectors. From here, you are actually able to filter out the schools as well based on those student groups. So if you're showing all students by default, it's going to show that right now. But you can also click on different student group. If you want to click on Asian students, you click it and it would actually change it at the bottom here. So you could look at all your Asian students at the different schools. But today we're going to be looking at the English learners because that's what we were targeting in this exercise. So let's click on it and we're going to see that it did a couple of things. One, it did change the English learners. It filtered the schools below to that, as we can see. Also, notice that it populated this panel on the right-hand side over here. When you click on something, it's going to do a few things. First, it's going to update the information and say you want to be blue in 5 years. We're going to change that. So we want to actually be green in 3 years. So we're going to click green. And we're going to change the target years to 3. And notice that when we clicked it on the left-hand side, it actually changed all this information here. So you know that you're targeting, you want to be green in 3 years on graduation rate for English learners at your district. So by doing so, now we get this list that tells you a detailed plan for how you're going to get to green in 3 years. You're going to see that you are going to be required to change your status by 1.9 percentage points year over year to achieve that status, for a total of 5.8 cumulative percentage rate change over those 3 years. What does that look like in terms of students? That's actually going to be, you're going to need to improve by 12 students per year. So you're going to have to graduate 12 more students every year to achieve the goal of green in 3 years. On the 5x5 grid, we see that it also put a marker and they match to what you see on the little table above that. So when you see the current, it's going to have the X, and if you make no change, it's going to give you the O, and then it's going to get progress through what you're going to achieve over the next 3 years. So let's start by looking at that. When we click play, we can see it animate how it's going to go through this table above it. So when you hit the play button, you're going to see how you're going to arrive at green in 3 years if you were to do it, in this plan. Of course, you can do it for schools. You can do it for any indicator. You can do it for any student group. You can also display the charter schools if you wanted to click on the charter drop down here to display charters. You can see those as well. Another thing you can do is actually change it, this button here that says state. If you click on it, you'll change it to the federal accountability rules, which will default to you making it to the high level and the number of years that you can select here. But it'll default it to green because that's kind of where you need to be if you're trying to be meeting the federal accountability standards. All this data is coming from the California School Dashboard. All the cutoffs on the 5x5s are coming from the technical guide. And the assumptions being made with the number of students is that all the business rules for accountability will remain the same. You're going to have about the same number of students, and the participation rate penalties for the CASP SBAC will remain the same. They will be changing. We also know that the 5x5 grids are going to be changing, and so will the cutoff points. So when those are updated and published, we will be updating this as well. One of the cool things is with this tool is on the grids, it actually changes the grids dynamically. So when you click a smaller population of students, you'll automatically get a 3x5. So if you were to look at over here where it says graduation for this particular 5x5, if we were to click on a continuation school, let's click this one. There are less than 150 students. There's 48 here. So what you're going to see is that it changed over to DAS and 3x5. So it's observing all the DAS rules and all the 3x5 rules when it changes. So you don't have to really think about that. It's already going to gray them out for you so that you know what you're looking at and that you're working with a 3x5 because of the size of your population. After you play it once, it will actually set it at whatever year that you selected. So we can actually go back here, click on this, set it back to current. And if we wanted to play this again, we can do it. And again, it will observe the rules of the 3x5. It won't go past them. And it'll set your plan for how to achieve, blue in 3 years. So again, in this case here, we see that it only requires graduating an additional 4 students per year to achieve a goal of green in 3 years. If at any point you get stuck or have some questions as to what is being displayed on the screen, clicking on the help question mark will display an overlay that can assist you to see what the different elements of the dashboard are. And when you're done with it, you can just click close on the X and it will go away until you need it again. Okay, I know there was a question about its availability, and yes, that click on the link. Graduation rate is orange. Okay, so you can play with this already, and all the schools are loaded. If you have any issues with it, I'll be here on the chat. You can ask me, but everything is loaded. Let's say that your district. Stop already. Shut up, Steve. Okay, so next one. What's next? I think we have our reflection time.
Yeah, so what we'll do is, I know we didn't do what good teachers do and give you some time to reflect, but that was a technical issue. And so what we'll do is take a time to do a breakout right now. Alicia will put you in breakout rooms with your LEA teams, or however you numbered yourself, that's the team that you will go with. We'll have about 10 minutes for breakout, and then we'll go ahead and add the stretch break to that, and then we can all come back at 10:30. And so enjoy your breakouts. We'll make sure to give you some timing notices there and break yourselves as necessary. And so I will put the discussion for breakouts in the chat, which I just did, and happy breakout, happy discussing. And you can put it on the next slide, Brian, please. Oh, the numbers are climbing, so everyone's coming back. All right, welcome back, everybody. We hope you had fruitful discussions, and if you were able to manage to sneak in a little stretch break in there as well. We'll go ahead and continue with our presentation. And this next section is the through line concept and forethought process for actions. And so as we think about our LCAP development this year, I offer the definition of forethought here. And one thing we want to keep in mind during LCAP development is forethought. It's the key to developing a coherent plan with a through line. And Brian did allude to the through line earlier. And so what we'll do in the next few slides is go through some of those elements of a through line. And so the first one is, well, it's a continuation of the definition. And so all of these things in our LCAP are the elements that make up the series or parts of the whole. So our LCAP is our whole. And so we know about our students, their needs, any gaps they have, and any input that our stakeholders offer for supporting our students feed into what we determine together between stakeholders, the goals and actions, and then the particularly targeted actions for increased improved services for unduplicated students. And in the next slide, we look at our students. And so when we're looking at actions, we're moving away from a generic description of a high number of suspensions across several student groups of great concern in our district to a more detailed one that identifies the students and the particular concern and the outcome we may want for them. The next slide goes into our greatest needs. Where might we find those? There's a little screenshot of the template there, but we can use our local indicators and our dashboard data to help us identify those greatest needs. And then the next slide will show performance gaps. That screenshot is one of the reports that we can get from the dashboard that will highlight some performance gaps in different indicators for particular student groups. What else is part of our through line? Our stakeholders, and our stakeholders include our students, including our unduplicated students, the community and parents, as well as educators within and without our district. And so when we look at a description for an action that would serve unduplicated students or be marked as contributing to the increased improved services, there are a few things that we want to consider. And so that's a brief description there that might be in our action box, but we go to the next slide and we look at what you've had some practice with used on the learning continuity and attendance plan. And so when we're looking at actions that are targeted for increased and improved services for our students, what was the forethought in developing that action? And part of that thinking is what needs, conditions, and circumstances of our unduplicated students were considered. And so when we look at that first, the language in the green font, we see how the language describes who's doing what for whom. It addresses the needs and circumstances or conditions of unduplicated students. And it sets the stage for the action or service and models the forethought that we would have in developing such an action. So I won't read it to you, it's on your screen, but that's what the green part would say. And so this is intended to be represented in the increased improved section, because as you noticed in the learning continuity and attendance plan, that explanation for principally directed in addressing those, considering those needs first, is part of answering that prompt. When we look at the purple font, we see what I call is the meat of the action, essential to actions that are considered contributing. This part describes how the action itself, the design of it, the content, method, or location is directly linked to the first part of the green section. So it's linked to those needs, conditions, or circumstances, and it describes the relationship to those elements. When we look at the final part, and just so you know, your actions don't all have to look like this. I want to make that clear right now. They don't have to. This is a very elaborate, very detailed example, just to highlight and leverage the through line thought process and the action descriptions. So the language in the orange font is that final required part where for an action to be considered contributing. And so, like the green action, this may be in the action description, although it really is part of the description in the increased improved service section. So it aligns with meeting the needs of the specific needs that were identified in the LCAP, thus contributing to the through line and to the outcomes that are expected for students to achieve in a goal. When we go to the next slide, now you can see where each of these might be described. So in your action description box, just that middle section, and it doesn't have to be as wordy as I created there, but that's the description that might be in your action box. And then you can see that green font and the orange font sections are those explanations that would go in your increased improved services prompts. And of course, we will go into detail about that when we go into LCAP writing and development in later workshops. And so the next couple of slides just break down those three descriptors that I just went through and showed you in the whole prompt. So this first one is the green one, and in the highlights you can see the needs, conditions, or circumstances that were thought through for the students for whom this action is written. You can see it's 2/3 of students in poverty. Then when we get to the purple font, this one is the main action language. So this was that the language that was going to be in my action box descriptor. And then the final slide shows what's in the orange font. And so the expected outcomes. And so we'll have a survey, and we hope that that survey shows that students feel more connected and that suspensions will decrease. And then that's just a duplicate of the slide, but that's the middle section of the prompt. But when we go to the next slide, that's just an underscoring of the through line process. And so when we think about the through line, you're beginning with the end in mind. So you're planning, but you want to, just like when we're thinking about assessments, what do we want the outcome to be for our kids? And so how plan that and ensure that what we've thought through, considering their needs and conditions, that the actions and services are targeted so that they can reach the outcomes that we want for them. And so that's the through line piece. The next slide just gives another reminder of all of the elements of the through line. And with that, we're going to give you some more team time. And here's your reflection. What is your understanding about the through line and planning actions for unduplicated students with forethought? And I see that Melissa has put the comment to please add your questions to the chat if you had any from your breakout room. I will go ahead and put this prompt into the chat and then give you guys some more time to chat with your teams about the through line. So Alicia, when you're ready, we can give them.
Okay, they should be open. And if you want to be in a different room, please just let us know.
Awesome. All right, happy chatting. See you in a few minutes.
Okay, I'm pausing the recording again.
Behave.
Everybody's coming back. Welcome back. Brian, you can move it to the next slide, please. All right, welcome back, everybody. Hope you had another great discussion with your team. Remember that if you have any questions from your breakout, please add those to the chat, and our team will also stay on afterwards to answer any questions or just enjoy some discussion time with you. At this moment, we'll go ahead and on with our presentation, and I will pass it over to our esteemed James Whittington to talk about budget overview for parents.
Perfect. Thank you, Naomi. I know we're talking about a lot of planning for LCAP, and so this feels a little odd to throw this in there, but we want to take this opportunity to talk about the budget overview for parents, especially in light of the upcoming deadline in December. So just to remind you guys, the budget overview for parents, that's in Ed Code. That's why we have to do it. So everyone has to adopt one each year by July 1st. That was the old rule. And then along came SB 98 and COVID, and that amended some of the timelines for this year. So if we jump ahead in the slides. So as a reminder, the statute requires, to the greatest extent practicable, the budget overview for parents should use language that is understandable and accessible to parents. So make sure you're not using the closed captioning in today's workshop, because I don't think that's accessible or makes any sense to anybody, at least not when I'm talking. So, but again, the requirement is that it should be as clear and as simplified as possible, so that the intent is that it's a translation tool for parents, that they can see at a quick snapshot what the budget overview, or how the budget and the LCAP tie together. And is there a translation requirement? I believe if your LCAP is translated into other languages, the budget overview for parents should also be translated. So as a reminder, this year there was no BOP with your learning continuity attendance plan that you guys took in September. Instead, the timeline was changed to align the BOP with instead of the LCAP, with the learning continuity plan that you just adopted, and with the first interim report. So everything you're going to be using in the budget overview for parents should come from either your 2019-20 LCAP, your 2021 learning continuity attendance plan, and then your 2021 first interim financial report. And the timeline for this year is it must be adopted in conjunction with your first interim report by December 15th. And so we know there are a couple LEAs that have board dates after December 15th. The statute says it has to be done before December 15th, 2020. I'm not aware of any ramifications other than the potential, outside stakeholder groups saying that you didn't adopt it in compliance with the December 15th deadline. But there's no ramification from our office if you go on the 16th or 17th, which I know many districts are planning. However, it does need to go with your first interim report. So if you're adopting your first interim report on December 15th, the budget overview for parents should be adopted at the same meeting, not in November ahead of the first interim report. They should be lined up and go to the same meeting. So we have sent out from our office, so from our DFS, we've sent out a budget overview for parents template for each district to use. And so what we did was, with the help of our data team, we compiled the data from your 2019-20 LCAP and put it into a spreadsheet so to make it easier for you guys to use, as well as the learning continuity attendance plan. So we've put out a guide for that. We've sent you guys each a template. If you have any questions as you're preparing that, please reach out to DFS. We're more than happy to help walk you through the data input for that. So just as a reminder, you're going to pull first interim numbers, all those red boxes or that red big box that's highlighted, those will all come from your first interim report. So that entire yellow section, and then the top line of your peach section on the data input sheet. The next two data fields will come from the learning continuity plan, and then the last ones are from your 1920 LCAP and your unaudited actuals from 1920. And now I saw a question in the chat about the public hearing. So the public hearing requirement for the budget overview of parents, according to CDE's interpretation, was deemed met when you did your public hearing for your learning continuity and attendance plan. So there's no need for a separate budget overview for parents public hearing at that December meeting. And then there's a question about the templates. So for all the districts, we sent out templates with the data we had. For the charter schools, we didn't have the data lined up to send out a template for you, but we're more than happy to help you guys work through that data set. So if you need any help, please reach out to my team in DFS and we'll help you for the charters that are out there. As a reminder too, that all LEAs, including charters, so districts and charters, are required to post their BOP on the homepage of the website along with the LearnCap and your LCAP federal addendum where applicable. So the wherever you've posted your learning continuity attendance plan, the BOP should also be posted there after you adopt it. And there's a okay, and then switching gears off of the budget overview parents, just to tee up kind of for the next section of the LCAP. As a reminder that we always believe that the LCAP is most effective when fiscal and program are working together. And I know this year especially has been challenging to get teams to meet together. So I appreciate you guys all being here today. But there's the timelines this year have made, I think, a little bit more challenging to keep everybody in sync. So with the budget overview of parents, we foresee this being fiscal heavy this time around, but of course, work with your teams. Don't do anything in isolation when it comes to the LCAP, because you want to make sure there's alignment across the LCAP in your budget. And then I think the next slide, yeah, just a reminder about monitoring the budget in the LCAP. This year's schedule is a little bit unique, but we had the adopted budget in June, and then we have the first interim budget and the budget overview with parents, which will go in December. And then your next look at updating budget projections will be March. And then of course, on the LCAP side, the next monitoring process for last year's LCAP, or this year's LearnCap, I should say, it's going to be the annual update in June. So there are plenty of already built-in timelines in terms of the budget and LCAP, good opportunities to sync up the budget side and the program side in terms of planning. Especially this year with so many contingencies and unknowns in terms of where the budget goes from here at the state level. And I think that's my, so again, teeing up for the next presentation, another recommendation, another piece of advice from our team is to start with a common concept of what your base services are, what increased and improved services have we already been providing, and then what's our process internally to incorporate new actions or change actions that may or may not be working. But I don't want to steal too much thunder from the next section. So I will end it there. And with one last opportunity, if there's any questions on the budget overview for parents, or as you're working on it in the next month or so, if you have any questions, please reach out to our office. We're more than happy to help. And if you get your budget overview for parents done, and you would like us to take a look at it before you adopt it, we're more than happy to do that too. It's kind of like a fast pass review on the budget overview of parents to make sure it aligns with your first interim.
Awesome, thanks, James. So we have a stretch break. I do want to ask the group, would you like to continue moving forward and or go ahead and take the 5-minute stretch break? I don't hear anything, so maybe we should take our stretch break. Oh, keep going, move forward. All right, we'll do that. Thank you. So with that, thank you for your comments. Thank you, James, for that. And we will move on to our next presentation. We have our colleagues from West Ed, Tia, Anthony, and Sarah with us, and they will go over redefining the base to advance equitable resource distribution for all our students. So I hand it over.
Thank you so much, Naomi. I appreciate that. It's so good to be virtually back in Riverside County. I think the last time we were actually traveling, it was in Riverside County. We were with Paris Union, Desert Sands, Palm Springs, and then all of this work was actually kicked off with our partnership with Temecula Valley. So it's really great to be back here and to have this opportunity to take advantage of this unique moment in time, if you will. So let's just go over our intent outcomes for this part of our segment today. And am I advancing slides or? Okay, great. Thank you. So we're going to just go over why we want to define the base, why it's important to us, especially in this time, and then review the defining the base framework. Some of this will be review for some of you, and then some of it might be brand new. So we're hoping that if you're like me, once I hear it 2, 3, 4 times and it finally goes, okay, it clicks and it sinks in. And then we'll move into highlighting those increased and improved services, as your county has also shared with you earlier today, and then give you some examples in practice of what this could look like. And finally, give you some key considerations to complete this process as you're moving forward. So why define the base? Well, before we do get started, if one of the greatest impacts of COVID, as you know, has really, I think, given us a moment in time to take a pause and reflect on what is important to us and how important it is to be really intentional in how we allocate our resources. And first, just want to acknowledge all the hard work that you have done in transitioning to a distance learning program and making these tremendous shifts in this unprecedented time. And I, like I said, like to look at the silver lining in this, and the silver lining for us, I think we like to offer is to take that moment and really look at what it is we have in our base and how we are strategically planning for our increased and improved services for all of our students as well as our staff. So we always start with our why. We start with our why with everything we do in life, and in education, our why is our students. So what our students need is really what defines how we decide what our base is and those increased and improved services. So why we define the base impacts both our programmatic decisions as well as our fiscal decisions. On the program side of the house, it helps us to better serve our students and their complex needs, and to really streamline what it is we need to do in order to meet those needs. It also helps us differentiate between our fiscal and our human resources based on need and not necessarily our program eligibilities. And then, of course, it helps us determine and demonstrate how we are increasing and improving services for our students. On the fiscal side, it helps our leaders to make decisions and anticipate for planning and change funding. That's both when we get increases in our funding as well as when we may experience some loss in our revenue streams. It also helps, as James was saying, promote that alignment in our resources and our expectations and how we're distributing these across our systems. It's so important for our fiscal and program to be working together as we are making these decisions. And then finally, it helps us to reduce that duplication of effort in our human and our fiscal resources. We're better able to redistribute our resources in order to meet the needs of our students. So let's move on to the framework. So the framework for redefining the base, if you will. So we first begin by reorienting our planning mindset. I know many of you have seen this before. If you've heard Janelle and I speak on this, or Jason Willis and I speak on this, we always begin with reorienting our mindset. So transitioning from that planning for compliance to planning for performance. And that planning for performance really begins with looking at the needs of all of our students as well as our student groups. And I think in the future, I'm going to add our teachers to that, because I think one thing of COVID is that we've really learned that we really need to pay attention to not only what our students need, but absolutely what our teachers need as well in order to then design our programs and then find the appropriate funding that we have available to us in order to carry out those programs and services. We also need to recognize that our students have different needs and different levels and need different levels of support. I'm so sorry, the mailman just came. My apologies. This is Zoom world that invites us into our homes, and I have two new little dogs that I adopted during this shutdown. So they like to tell me when the postman has come. So my apologies. So yes, we have different. Our students have different levels of needs and require different levels of support. So as we're deciding to do that, thank you so much. It's important that we recognize and honor that and be able to determine that as we're planning our programs and services. So with that, we've been granted a lot of flexibility in our funding, and LCFF and ESSA in particular have released a lot of the restrictions that once were in place, with our revenue limits and under NCLB. And we've been able to, what we like to share this analogy of from baking a cake to baking a pie, in which we are able to serve sides that go along with what it is we need to provide for all of our students. So when we think of it, you know, we all in California especially, we are transitioning to this multi-tiered system of support in how we design and think about our programs and services. And what we would like to offer is, when we're thinking about defining the base is what comes just below all of these services, or below our tiered services, if you will. And yeah, just like that. Sorry. So as we're thinking about our base, like there's a lot of conversation, right? Like we can go through line item by line item of our budget, which we have and we can do. But really, when we're thinking about categories or buckets, like the base should really be that bare minimum that falls right underneath what will hold and sustain all of the increase and improved services that we are targeting for all of our students. So we want to first understand, it's helpful to understand our funding in layers. And what we offer is understanding it in 3 layers. Our universal funds, which consist of our unrestricted general, state, and local funds. Our supplemental funds, which are our restricted state funds, and in our context would be our supplemental and concentration funds. And then our federal funds as well. So remembering those are supplemental in nature. And then our 3rd layer being our specialized funds. So these are those more restricted federal grants or state grants, or even our one-time funds. And our one-time funds can be those funds that come from the state that the governor likes to give us at the last minute in May. And we're like, what? Come on, guys. We're very grateful, but it also is one-time funds. And then also our carryover is one-time in nature as well. So really being intentional on how we allocate those funds to meet the needs. And we have it here, our pie 10 here, as a reference to, we cannot bake a pie bigger than the amount of money that we have to serve all of our students. If we have enough money for an 8-inch pie, we make an 8-inch pie. If we have 10, we make 10. But this is just to help us maintain that fiscal solvency that is really important for us as we are planning and designing our programs and services. So in order to know what type of pie we need to make, we need to understand our data. So and right now we don't have all of our data, right? As Brian was sharing before, the data, the dashboard, we aren't going to have everything, but we still have some things. And one of the most important things I think we like to offer is that we do have trend data. So we still have 3 years of prior data that can at least tell us how or where or what we need to focus on, or in other words, what type of pie we need to make to serve for all of our students. So the base really comes down to being what is in ed code. And the ed code it helps us to determine, is really essentially what is needed to routinely open and operate our schools. So at minimum, our people, place, and things. And we like to describe this as the crust. So what's holding all of this together? Now you'll notice the pie crusts are traditionally thin, right? So that's not going to be enough. So we need to fill that pie. So as we're filling that pie, This is where we are deciding what those universal services are for our students. So this will always impact all of our students, but we'll also be able to serve our targeted students. So as we're starting to think of that tier 1 intervention or those tier 1 supports across our entire district, this is what we would call the filling of that pie. And then after we've determined what those are, then we have our pie that we can serve all of our students no matter what. They will at least benefit at minimum from what it is we have created by looking at the data that we've been assessing along the way. Now, when we come to our annual LCAP, traditionally we are looking at what is within our LCAP, right? And specifically focusing on our increased and improved services. But what we would like to offer is that it's equally important to look to make sure that we are, do we need any more ingredients in our base or in the crust? Or as we are experiencing with this COVID, which I like to kind of call, we are now in the chopped test kitchen, right? And we are bringing 4 random ingredients and we've got to fit it into this crust and this pie, and we've got to go, you have 20 minutes to figure it out. Well, the same is true for our annual review process, in that we need to make sure that the pie that we are making is still meeting the needs of the students that we are serving. So let's move on to our increased and improved services. And I won't go into extreme detail on this because I think you guys have this part down pretty well, but we do want to continue out the story, right? Because the LCAP is a story, right? And it does start with the base of our story. So it's important, we feel it's important to understand funding as well in terms of basis versus purpose. So the basis in which we receive our funding, I'm speaking to our financial side of the house. We have to account for our revenue and expenditures within our financial statements at per something, right? And in education, that per something is traditionally our per pupil amount. So we have to recognize that within our financial system. But then when we look at the purpose of our funding, oftentimes what's carried over from NCLB and the revenue limits is that we receive this funding only for these students. But when we take it a step back and read our ed code and read the language within there, it really says that this funding is ultimately, depending on the students that they are for or have been allocated for, are intended to improve outcomes for all of those students, particularly those that need additional attention and support. So Title I, for example, is probably the one that is, in my mind, the best. The allocation we get is on our free and reduced price lunch students, right, or our low income students. But the intent and purpose of those funds is to improve outcomes for all the low performing students. So those are 2 different things when you kind of think about it. So we wanted to just give you that grounding as we're thinking about our supplemental resources moving forward. So our LCFF flexibilities, when we read the ed code related to supplemental and concentration, the ed code tells us that we need to be able to describe how services provided for unduplicated pupils are increased or improved, at least by a percentage calculated as compared to services provided for all students. Now, when we are thinking about LCFF, what we've noticed is that LEAs still think of this as only for our unduplicated students. And what we would like to offer is really important to understand that it is for all of our students, but when we are allocating our supplemental concentration, it is really in how we are improving what we are doing for all of our students increasing and improving for our unduplicated students as compared to what we are offering to all of our students. And of course, we have our thresholds with our 55 and 45%, which you are all very well versed in, I know that. So as we're moving on to the ESSA flexibilities, I think the most important flexibility there is that schools and districts are allowed to allocate at their own discretion, so long as they have completed a comprehensive needs assessment and have been able to determine that what it is they need to do for their students is reasonable and allowable within the context of those laws. And again, those being that ultimately we are trying to improve outcomes for our low performing students. We also have tremendous flexibility when it comes to IDEA. We are allowed to use a portion of those funds to help within our general education program to serve the needs of our students with disabilities. And I have some members on my team that will go into that in a little bit, but just wanted to offer that we do have a lot of tremendous flexibilities there. Then when we look at our CARES Act funds, these funds are intended as well to supplement funds that where we have either lost out on our general fund, which consists of our base, or other funds to help supplement hardships that we've been experiencing no matter what. And while this right now it's called the CARES Act, I want to just invite us to think about this being as any type of supplemental grant we would receive from the federal government or from the state, as this is how this would operate within our system. So then moving to building out our tiers. So our second tier, which we equate to the ice cream on the side, this is something that goes with the pie that we are serving. This is where we are aligning that our supplemental funds and our federal funds to build out and design that second tier 2 level of instruction or prevention, if you will. And then we know that not all of our students are going to be satisfied with this. So how do we wrap around with our IDEA funds? Now, this is where we can look for those outside services, those community service providers, our professional development. How are we designing and thinking about the needs of all of our students, and in particular, our students with more specific needs? And finally, we have our entire system built, right? We've designed our third tier. So we're adding that topping to our pie and our ice cream that we're serving. Either it's nuts, it's whipped cream, it all depends on what it is that we are doing. So yes, so this is essentially how it looks like, what we think that it looks like. So now I'm going to invite Sarah and Anthony, my colleagues, to walk us through what this looks like in practice. So when we're thinking about needs-based planning, what are the conversations we should be having with our program and our fiscal team? So Sarah, Anthony, do you want to just walk us through some examples?
Thanks, Tia. Yeah, I think one of the most important things is that we're having this conversation together. And I didn't catch the name of the presenter before you, but he was emphasizing the importance of fiscal and program coming together and having these conversations and not having them separately. And I think we would expand that to say, like, all of the programs coming together to have this conversation, because when we start having this conversation and we're really looking at needs-based professional learning and needs-based planning for students, what we're going to find out is that our data tell us that our staff and our kids in different programs have a lot of overlapping needs. And so if we think about this year is a great example, right? That every teacher in California has had to learn how to provide remote instruction. And if we're not cautious, what we're concerned that may end up happening is that within one district, the special ed program could buy some professional learning on how to provide remote instruction for kids with disabilities, right? And your general ed department could buy some professional learning on how to provide remote instruction and how to teach reading. And your reading interventionists and your reading coaches could buy some professional learning. And what we end up with is everyone trying to meet the same need and using different funds to meet those needs, and actually duplicating the interventions to meet those needs, whether it's for teachers or for students. And so I think the first piece really is this idea of coming together and using our data to identify and prioritize needs and see where they are the same. Because if our EL kids need reading instruction and our special ed kids need reading instruction and our low performing kids in the title school and whatever our other subgroups are, sometimes we don't go far enough to identify how common those are. And I'm just thinking, like, within reading, how much of that is decoding, how much of that is context and those crossovers. And so we end up duplicating both our time, our interventionist time, but then our funding to purchase the same thing over and over again. Anthony, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And then just when you talk about duplicating the needs, just think about the fact that, when you have a need, then you pay for it. So you have also duplicated funding. And duplicated funding increases your expenditures at the school level. And if you're trying to achieve the same goal, spending the same amount of money twice for the same purpose, what you end up happening is that you are being less efficient. You're spending more and you are being less effective because all those different resources could have been combined into one single resource to help maybe achieve a better goal, a better purpose. So it's really important to take that into consideration when you assess your needs. If you have duplicated needs, try to see how they merge and then try to see if you can combine the funding to reduce the amount of expenditure for the same purpose.
Yeah, exactly. So on the next slide, this is an example of assessing pupil learning loss, right? We know we need to do that for everyone. We know we also have specific groups for whom that's going to be important that have to do it. In addition, there's some supplemental needs. So if we think of for special education students, as we start to look at learning loss and compensatory services and those pieces, but probably there are overlapping, in this case, overlapping professional learning or overlapping software for better progress monitoring, those type of things that could happen across. And I think what we found over time is that we, Tia and I have done many presentations on blending and braiding funds, and we talk about these funding strategies, and we start from the allowable use of funds. And when we do that, it becomes really complicated and it feels like a hard conversation. But we found is when we actually start from this need and what our common objective is. So Tia talked about that common cost objective. When we get there and we all have the same goal, generally there's a way to fund that and to either braid or blend funds together, and that can come in on the back end. And it's much simpler when we start with what is the common need and what is the strategy to address it. So Tia, I'm not sure. So yeah, do you want to talk about this slide, Tia?
Sure. So as Sarah was talking, we're building out our programs and services, but again, when we look at defining a base and looking at those universal needs that we're identifying for all of our teachers and all of our students, we need to take into account what it is we do have in our base. So we do have, and you'll see later on in this slide, we have our teachers in place, we have our principals in place, we have our facilities, we have our instructional materials and supplies. So what is it we need to do to build on that? And discovering, looking at that learning loss, take into consideration what you've already done in your continuity plans, right? Like, don't lose any of that information or that flow, right? Like, these should feed into one another as we're looking to build these out, but always remembering what it is we have in our base and how we're building that up as we're developing our plan strategies. Yeah.
And I also wanted to add that, every time you start thinking about the funding first, instead of thinking about the needs first, people tend to be more focused on all the restrictions that are around the fundings that are available. We know we have restrictions, we need to comply with them, but let's just put a focus on all these restrictions at the back end. That will allow you to develop a better process to address the need assessments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think on the next slide, we have, how we're like identifying these learning gaps. And Sarah, I don't know if you want to add anything on this in terms of the planning.
Yeah, I think this is a piece again, and people say, like, quite often when we talk about blending and braiding funds, people say, well, how is it going to look different if I blend or braid my funds, right? Whether it's for, in this case, professional learning. And I would say it's just who's sitting next to you in the training, right? Because again, when we think about these pieces, when we start from the need and what people need to address, what we need to put in place to meet that need, we realized that, again, in this example, we had a universal plan, which is professional development for all teachers on virtual assessment, right? That's part of the base. Everyone's going to get that. And if you think of students, we could relate this to students as well. And then when we get into that supplemental piece, there are some teachers who are having to do much more assessment from what we know about learning loss over the spring. Elementary grades, right? Those young K-3, those kids had a lot more learning loss. And so we know that those K-3 teachers may need an extra PLC to help them talk with other teachers, to talk about learning loss, to talk about what strategies they're using for kids, how they're implementing those virtually, and some coaching. And then on top of that, but those same things they're learning may be what the special ed teachers need, and then the special ed teachers just need something additional to help them make decisions about compensatory education or eligibility determinations. And so as we look at those pieces, when we start with that base of what everyone needs, and then we say, are there groups that need things on top? Then the base covers what it needs to for everyone, just like it should for kids, right? Core instruction, everybody gets access to that. And then when we know there are groups of kids, before we might have had, I like tea as toppings, but we might have had like our special ed ice cream and our multilingual students whipped cream and our nuts for the migrant program, right? And now we're saying instead, the ice cream is supplemental reading instruction, and it can go to any of those kids. And like Anthony said, on the back end, we're going to figure out what that looks like, whether we can blend or braid funds, but we can figure that out. We can proportion that out, but we're going to plan by saying, what do they need? And then the whipped cream is some sort of social emotional intervention, right? That again, there are going to be overlapping kids from all of those groups there. And then maybe the nuts are counseling due to traumatic events that have happened for kids that have lost family members during COVID, or have family members who've lost their jobs or have lost their homes. Again, if we think about those needs first, right, we're going to find those kids from different groups that have the same need. And then more efficiently, we're able to provide those. And then after all of that comes the figuring out the funding strategies so that auditors will be okay with that. But that really isn't the hardest part. The hardest part is getting people to break down those silos and saying, no, my ice cream ball is going to be just special ed kids. That's who I'm used to working with, instead of, okay, there's a group of kids across these groups that need something more, that we can give them all the same thing. And we're going to think about grouping those students based on their need rather than their eligibility.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. And again, as Sarah was saying, bringing it back to the base, how we are building and designing those, assessing those learning losses and designing our plans to meet those needs. So I know we want to get you into your breakout rooms here really quickly. So we only have a couple more slides. So in the end, when we're thinking of both the program, looking at both the program and the funding side of the house. So again, our base falls underneath what it is we are designing. It's supporting the foundation of our tiered structures of support. So on the program side, again, that tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, designed to meet the needs of all of our students wherever they are at. And then when we look at the funding side, we see that the base fits into, it can be blended with our supplemental concentration, then our supplemental concentration with our federal funds, and then our federal funds or other restricted funds can then be used to provide funding for the services for our most neediest students, and all of them used together to reach the intended outcomes that we desire within our system. And this is just another visual to help us think about it. I'm a visual person. I need visuals to like piece it all together. You know, we've been doing this for a long time, and I know you've all heard Janelle present on this multiple times, and the top image is from Janelle. I know you have all seen this. So I've taken it and I've said, maybe we want to do this. So maybe we want to do that. So she's given, her permission and blessing and saying like, this is a good way to think about how we define our base and allocate for our increased and improved services. On the next image is a handout again, reorienting our planning mindset, right? Always starting with our kids. So the next image we would like to offer is sort of a framework that we put together. And Again, I guess it could be like a map. You could put little pieces on it if you have pieces or coins or whatever to help you kind of think about how to define your base and then allocate for your increased and improved services. So again, starting with our needs and not just our student needs, but also our teachers' needs. And we can probably extend that to all of our staff. From then we move into defining that base, like what's our base program? And we always start with the total number of our students that we serve, right? We cannot have things in our base unless it should be based on the number of students that we are serving. We should not be doing more than what we have available to us. And this goes, we have our instructional needs as well as our non-instructional needs. So we get funding in our base to fund our class size ratios at minimum, right? And these are the ratios that LCFF only offers our K-3, but we also have other class size ratios that I think are dated back to like 1930 something, I don't know. It's way back. And our place, right, we always need to meet Williams requirements, and with our things, our instructional materials for both our instructional and non-instructional side of the house, right? Then we can move into our evidence-based strategies, and we put little funding sources there that we feel are appropriate to fund each one of those levels of support. Anthony suggested this morning that one-time funds could fall into the supplemental support as well, which it absolutely could, but it messes up my symmetry, and my mind's just like, I can't do that. But then I have to challenge myself and say, well, Tia, you have to, right? Like, so think of that first universal support box as funding that can be tiered down to the supplemental and specialized support. And the supplemental support as well. Any of those funding sources would be appropriate for specialized support as well. And of course, in California, we are charged with meeting the LCFF state priorities when we are planning in any context. So those are in the goldenrod box at the bottom, which we are the Golden State. So that's why that color was picked there. And as you go into your breakouts, I do believe that Naomi uploaded this into your resource folder. So we'd like you to just take some time and use this and reflect on the following questions that we have. And then I believe we will come back after you've had some time to reflect. If you guys have any other questions that you have of us while we're here, we'd be happy to take those on. Naomi, do you want to?
Awesome. Thank you, West Ed team. So informative. So yes, now it's time for the district or the LEA teams to get together in a breakout room, and we'll give you 15 minutes in your rooms to chat, and we'll come back and hear about any questions you may have. All right, Alicia, are we set for breakouts?
I think I was put in a breakout, but then not, I don't know. So sorry that we went a little bit over, but I hope that's okay with you guys.
Oh, no, we can adjust. We want to give them time to process, and then we'll have a little less time for the Q&A. I wondered if your team, can you guys say a little?
Cool, man.
So TN team, do you want to take 5 minutes to ask for any debrief of their breakouts, and then I'll close? And then we'll all stay on if that's okay to answer any other questions.
You want me to lead that? Is that what you said?
Yeah, is that okay?
Oh, sure, of course.
Okay.
Just cue me up when they're all back.
Yeah,
Okay.
almost there.
Oh, I see them all.
Yeah, it populates really quickly.
All right. Well, welcome back. I think we have almost everybody back. So we wanted to just offer the last few minutes here for an opportunity for you and your teams to just ask any questions that you discussed in your breakout rooms, or any other lingering questions you have related to some of the topics that we've shared today. So you can either put your questions in the chat or just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the questions. And if we aren't able to answer your questions right away, we'll definitely be getting those back to you as a resource through your county. So
This is Adela from Riverside Unified. Can we please have a copy of the beautiful base diagram that you showed us?
Yes, yes. And that was a last minute add. So I think Naomi just got it in there or is working on getting it. Yes, it's in the shared folder now. So you should be able to. Yes, you're welcome. So anything came up for you guys? Do you guys have any practices that are already in place? So there's a comment in the chat from Lisa. I've never seen the information shared that 15% of IDEA can be used for general ed support. What is the citation for that? Sarah, do you want to share a little bit more about that? Sarah is my special ed expert who I lean on, and so for that. So Sarah, do you want to share a little more about that?
Yeah, and I'll get the citation and put it in the chat, but that's for coordinated early intervening services. And those are services that are provided to students. It's under 302.26, and you may have heard it in regards to significant disproportionality, that if a district has significant disproportionality, it has to provide coordinated early intervening services. But IDEA allows for districts, and you do have to meet some stipulations there. So you need to be meeting the requirements of IDEA, but if you're doing that, thanks Anthony for the citation. You may use up to 15% of your IDEA Part B subgrants to provide services to students who are at risk for or in need of additional supports to not become special education students. And so you need to identify a specific group of students who aren't students with disabilities, and then they can be used to provide professional development or direct services, behavioral academic services for that specific group of students who needs additional supports but do not have disabilities.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And Lisa, I hope that answered your question, or we hope that answered all of your questions. I'm sure you were all asking that, because I asked that too. I'm like, Sarah, I need to know more about that, right? It's kind of that breaking that comfort level of how we think about and understand and allow ourselves to include the different types of funding into our planning processes. Any other questions? Are you guys all ready to just bake some pies with your chopped kitchen ingredients?
I just want to say that the conversations that we had made us reflect on some of the programs and components that we have. And in going through your presentation, it makes us realize, okay, if we have cohesiveness, if we have systems in place, we should have 80% of our students performing at or above grade level. I mean, that should be statewide, countrywide. So when we look in depth into that, then we can realize, okay, so if we don't, then what are the components that are missing to have a better pie, so to speak?
Yeah. I love that, Adela. That's exactly what it is. We're inviting all of you to think about, and as you transition or reorient that planning mindset, like what is it that we need and what should it be? And that's absolutely right. 80% of our students should be able to feed off of that base or that core program, right? Or what we call the base plus. So yes. And maybe we'll lean on you next time to figure out find out what you guys did in your district when you were approaching this work in your planning process.
So Tia,
Sure.
we want to check if the teams had time to go over the questions, and then if they could share some of the answer that they were coming up with.
Sure.
Those questions.
Yeah. So do you have any practices already in place that you could model here, or What about some barriers or advantages that you might see? Additional supports. I think Adela touched on some of those a little bit, but what other questions might you guys have? And maybe we'll need some more time to think about this. I know it's a kind of a lot to think about, and new different ways to approach our work. And I guess, again, we would just like to offer that this is definitely the opportunity to do that, to really transition in how we think about organizing our resources. You know, I think education will never be the same, right? We will never go back, hopefully, go back to the way we've always done things. And we just hope that you all take advantage of this opportunity and are hopeful that this has been a resource for you to utilize as you're moving forward in your planning process. And we would just like to add that we are working in partnership with your county office in providing these supports. So please reach out to your county or to us if you have any other questions. All right, and then I think if there aren't any questions, we will turn it back over to Naomi to take us through the next piece.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anthony, Sarah, and Tia. And I know as teams meet and get together and have their discussions, questions might come up. So we'll share those with you, or and let you know what comes up from our end. All right, so on the next slide, we'll come to our closing, and I just want you to know before everybody hops off is the West Ed team said that they would be able to stay on with our team if anyone has lingering questions once we close. And then for those of you who want to give feedback to the annual update, we have an input document where we can capture what you want us to share with CDE. So this next slide, somebody asked about the links for the next workshops. Workshop 2 will be in January. I realized I didn't put the dates on there. Oh no, the dates are there. The dates are hot links to the registration. And so you can see we're all together, districts and charter, for this one, and then we'll have separate sessions in January going forward. That January 22 session will be virtual, and that will be 9 to 3. So we'll extend it to a longer day and promise to have break times and engagement for you then. Workshop 3 and 4 have yet to be determined. We're hoping that they will be in person at the Moreno Valley Conference Center so we can get those breakfast burritos to you and yummy lunches. Otherwise, we'll if depending on public health orders, we'll let you know if that changes. And then on that note, we'll go to the next slide. And so for those who would like to hang on, I want to just thank everybody for joining us today for this session. We look forward to the next session. Thank you to the teams who shared with us, our government relations team, our district fiscal services team, and of course the amazing assessment, accountability, and continuous improvement team. And a special thanks to Alicia and Brian who helped with all the logistics today. So we'll hang on here. For those who want to share any update on the annual update draft, or sorry, give us feedback on the annual update draft that we can share with CDE, and then anybody who has questions for the West Ed team. So on that note, I wish you a great Friday. We end early. It's not like LCAP Workshop and it's late afternoon. So you have half a day still. Enjoy your lunch, your day, and your weekend, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Okay. So for those of you who are on and want to add input to the annual update, go ahead and either put your comments in the chat, or you can click on the link that's in this the input document there. And then if anyone, of course, has any questions for Sarah, Tia, and Anthony, please just unmute yourselves.
This is Adela again. Hi,
Adela.
Hi again. A question I have is, we are in the process of creating robust metrics, and we would like to know if apply, if there are any exemplary metrics that other districts have written that we could I know that you, as a teacher, I create my metrics based on my students' needs. Okay. As a principal, I used to help my teachers create their metrics based on the needs. Same thing is what we're doing right now at the district, but we want to make sure that we're targeting the right metrics, because